On behalf of the League of Women Voters and the North Hennepin Area Chamber of Commerce, I'd like to welcome you back to the second portion of our forum this evening. The League of Women Voters is an organization that is nonpartisan and volunteer-based. It is organized at the local, state, and national level to encourage citizens to participate in government. While LWV members do study and take stands on issues, we do not endorse or support political parties or candidates. The LWV does encourage its members as individuals, as we encourage each of you to get involved in your community and the political party of your choice. However, the views expressed in this forum are those of the individual candidates and not those of the League of Women Voters. By sponsoring this forum this evening, the League provides an opportunity for citizen participation and exposure to candidates, but does not provide an endorsement of any candidate or candidates. All viable candidates have been invited to participate this evening. Tonight's forum, we have the House District 36B, which is represented by, let's see where we got here. Now I have you all mixed up. So Melissa Hortman, and her opponents are Andrew Kratoska, who is unable to be here this evening, and Andrew Reinhardt. And then we have 40A, which is represented by Mike Nelson, who's running unopposed but is taking the opportunity to speak to his constituents. And then we have 40B, and our candidates are Deborah Hillstrom, who is the incumbent, and her challenger is Mr. Richard Cushing. In tonight's forum, the candidates will start with 5 of the 6 questions they received in advance, in which they have 1 minute to respond. Then our candidates will have up to 30 seconds to respond to each of the questions that are coming from the audience. Audience, please take the time to write your questions. Raise your hand if you need a card and a pen, and then raise your hand and it'll be collected to make sure that it follows the following criteria. Number 1, we can read your question and it's legible. Number 2, it hasn't already been asked. And number 3, it is not a personal attack on any candidates. This is a civilized forum. Candidates, the League would like to request that you refrain from making any personal attacks on your fellow candidates as well. And finally, at the end, you will be given 1 minute, which is your final question and your final statements for the evening. I'd like to take this moment to point out our timekeepers for this evening. They will show you when you have 15 seconds to finish your statements, and then they will show you when your time has expired. Please finish your sentence at that time, as I will be directing the next speaker's turn. The order has been randomly pre-selected. For the audience, please remember to turn off all communication devices at this time, and there will be no photography for the duration of the forum. All right, we're going to start off with the questions you received in advance. So the first one is, please tell us about your background and previous civic involvement that support your candidacy for this position. Our first responder is Mr. Michael Nelson.
Thank you. Again, I'm Representative Michael Nelson, and this is my home. I grew up in Brooklyn Center. I've lived in Brooklyn Park and Brooklyn Center area most of my life. I graduated from Park Center High School and Hennepin Technical College. I've participated with my sons in the Brooklyn Park youth sports, and I served as a local Boy Scout leader. I've also, in my local union, I've served in many positions in my local union. In my term in the legislature, I've served on the Transportation, the Government Operations, the Commerce Committee, Environment and Public Safety Committee since I've been in the legislature. It's been my honor to serve my neighbors in the Minnesota House of Representatives, working on issues important to the residents of Brooklyn Park.
Thank you. Our next responder is Ms. Melissa Hortman.
My name's Melissa Hortman, and my husband and I bought our first home in Brooklyn Park 20 years ago, and we decided to locate in Brooklyn Park to raise our family. My son is now a senior at Champlain Park High School, and my daughter is a sophomore. When my children were younger, I was a parent volunteer at Monroe Elementary School, and I got involved in the Monroe PTO. Later, I joined the Anoka-Hennepin Parent Legislative Team and worked to help pass levies in the Osseo and Anoka-Hennepin school districts. As my children got older, I volunteered as a Sunday school teacher and Girl Scout leader. And then when they became old enough to have their own social lives to some degree, I became involved in Brooklyn Park City Commissions. I was first elected to the Minnesota House in 2004, and I've served in leadership positions since 2006. As a small business person in our community, I feel I'm very in touch with the issues that face our residents, and those are home foreclosures in the city of Brooklyn Park, education, and transportation.
Thank you. Mr. Andrew Reinhardt.
Hi, I'm Andrew Reinhardt. My background, I have a degree in public relations, 9.5 years service between the U.S. Navy and Army National Guard. I was honored to receive the Mayor's Good Citizenship Award and Key to the City of Brooklyn Park last year for years of community service in the city. Also a District 279 Foundation Award for years of community service. I've been chair of the Parks Commission here in Brooklyn Park, served on the Citizens Long Range Improvement Commission, represented this area on the Met Council Transportation Advisory Board, been on other boards in the city like the Brooklyn Park Lions and the Historical Society and others. And recently been involved in some local issues like the bringing people together, standing up for what's right. We had the garbage organized trash hauling issue in Brooklyn Park last year that I helped stand up for residents for free market choice. Also as the leader of the 610 flag rally this summer where we took on MnDOT and got the flags back up honoring our veterans. So I'm invested in the community. I know the community. I'm fully prepared to represent this area as a legislator and work with the senator and mayor. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Richard Cushing.
Thank you. I came here in 1968 to attend the University of Minnesota and had the privilege of meeting my wife in this area. We have been now married 43 years. We have 9 children, one with special needs. We have 12 grandchildren. One of the reasons I decided to run for office is because I'd like them to have a future, something other than debt and taxes. I also have actually a little more than 25 years of experience working both in business as a consultant as well as a businessman. And I actually have been part of that did build this by starting businesses, growing businesses, hiring people, paying wages that became the taxes that paid not only for the roads and the bridges, but also the salaries of the career politicians. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Deborah Hillstrom.
Hello, my name is Deborah Hillstrom, and it has been an honor to represent the communities of Brooklyn Center and Brooklyn Park in the Minnesota House of Representatives. I've been proud to fight for tax fairness, for job creation, for quality education, affordable health care, safe neighborhoods, and for a safe environment. I grew up in Brooklyn Center. My husband did as well. We married and chose to raise our family here. My daughter now is in law school, and my son is in college. I served on the Brooklyn Center City Council. Previous to that, I served on the Planning Commission. I've always been an active member of the community, and I ask for your support to send me to the legislature so we can continue to work to improve the lives of Minnesotans and the residents of Brooklyn Center and Brooklyn Park. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question. How do you propose to address the budget deficit that is projected for the 2013-2014 biennium? Our first responder will be Ms. Hillstrom.
Well, one of the first things that needs to happen is the folks in the legislature need to admit that there's a problem. There is going to be a budget deficit, and current spending levels are higher than income. So we have to make some choices. We can no longer balance the budget through budget gimmicks. We can't continue to take money from our schools. $2.4 billion debt we owe to our schools is unacceptable. So we need to make certain that we change the tax system. We need to stop rewarding corporations that send their money overseas and don't pay their fair share of Minnesota taxes. We need to make sure that the richest Minnesotans are paying the same amount as middle-class Minnesotans, and currently they are not paying their fair share. We need to make sure that we have a sustainable future, and that means people have to pay their fair share, and we have to be honest about our budgeting.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson?
Thank you. As we approach the upcoming session, we need to take a balanced approach as we work to craft the budget. The tools available to us are the same as they've always been. We can either do it through all cuts, shifts, or raising revenue. And we probably need to use all of these tools to get the budget done. But we have to be honest with our citizens and our residents of Minnesota. The services we demand from our government, clean water, good schools, good roads, safe roads, all cost money. And we're going to have to figure out how to pay for those. For our state economy to recover from this, we must continue to invest in our schools and the infrastructure like roads so we can continue to compete in the world economy.
Thank you. Mr. Cushing.
Thank you. Well, we certainly need to pursue policies that have been proven to work. And historically, we can look back both at the federal level and at local government and see that what is happening today is not working. But I believe that across-the-board tax cuts for both businesses and individuals, allowing them to keep more of what they earn, and reduced regulatory burden can actually stimulate the economy. When this was done at the federal level in 1983, it actually ushered in a 25-year golden era of growth in the nation. And if you look at what happened in California in the late 1970s when Proposition 15 or 13 required a property tax cut of 57%, population increased, household income went up 35%, and tax revenues actually went up by 2/3.
Thank you. Ms. Hortman?
Well, the proposed general fund budget for the 2014-2015 biennium is $1.1 billion, but then you have to add in that we owe the schools $2.4 billion, and then inflation. Under Governor Pawlenty, we stopped counting inflation, but we actually do have to pay for that when it comes time to pay for the budget. So we're facing a $4.5 billion deficit in the next biennium, and borrowing more money from the schools, as Representative Hillstrom indicated, is not an option. The largest portion of the state's revenue comes from the income and sales tax, and people don't pay income and sales tax when they're not working. So the most important thing that the next legislature should do is to immediately take action to create jobs. With the cost of borrowing for the state at 2%, this is an ideal time for us to be building state infrastructure like roads and bridges and repairing our university buildings.
Thank you. And Mr. Reinhardt?
Yes, I believe we can live within our means. Families out there are suffering. Government needs to live within its means, too. We can get a control on spending and continue all the reforms that have been put through. Some of them already put through the last couple of years, making government more efficient, more accountable. But also we can grow the jobs in the economy, and that can correct a lot of the problems we have right now. And lower taxes, I believe, is part of that formula. The GOP legislature, you can debate on the numbers, but they did take $5 to $6 billion deficit and turn it into about $1 billion surplus. And a lot of spending that's out there, I often feel at a disadvantage running against the other side, because a lot of times the other pamphlets can come out that show a lot of toys, whether they're light rails or stadiums or things that have been purchased. And I feel on our side it's not as sexy to say I've kept some money in your pockets, I've controlled spending, I've allowed citizens to go out and grow the economy and spend more. But I look at my dad and what he worked for and the sacrifices he made, years in a factory, and I follow that.
Thank you. Our next question. Do you support increasing income taxes on individuals? At what income bracket do you support raising taxes, if any? How do you define fair share for taxes paid by individuals and married couples? Our first responder will be Mr. Reinhardt.
Well, top 10% incomes, so that's just under $130,000, pay about 56% of income taxes, according to the Department of Revenue. So you got top 10% paying over 50%. You have the bottom 90% paying less than 50%. Fair share is, is definitely misleading. I think Minnesota has to be competitive for our large businesses, for our small businesses, and for individuals. I know a lot of people like to go back and compare, including I've heard my opponent say it, and it's not an attack, but that in the mid-'90s when taxes were higher, the economy was better. But I think it's totally comparing apples and oranges. It's before more of a global economy. It's before people telecommuting. Just in our own house, we had a situation where my boys are both visually impaired, and we were going to send them to a school for the blind in Florida. And just my wife's income alone, the fact that she could work online on the Internet, would pay for about a third of our mortgage. So it's not just businesses that are leaving, large businesses that have said they've left because of higher taxes. It's also individuals who are voting with their feet. I just ran into a supporter this week who said the same thing, that he's moved.
Thank you. Mr. Cushing?
Well, with regard to fairness, I think one of the questions that has to be asked is what should be Minnesota government's fair share of the overall economy? In the last 10 years, there has been a total increase in the burden on taxpayers when you count increases in all taxes and increases in regulatory burdens of $11.1 billion. That's $2,099.52 for every man, woman, and child in the state. What makes career politicians think that they have the right to grow government faster than Minnesotans can make a living? Right now, the spending in St. Paul is growing faster than Minnesota's overall economy, and it's growing faster than personal incomes. It's just not a reasonable approach to government.
Thank you. Ms. Hortman?
I think we do need tax reform because we need to flatten the effective tax rate paid by all Minnesotans. When you look at the effective tax rate, the actual percentage that Minnesotans pay in state and local taxes, including their property tax and their sales tax, middle income and lower income families are paying a greater percentage of their income in taxes than people at the highest end. And that's before you take into account other ways that people pay government, for example, college tuition. The percentage of a wealthy person's income that would go towards college tuition at the University of Minnesota or Mankato State University might be small, but for a middle-class family, that's a huge proportion of their income. And a cuts-only approach would only increase costs like tuition on middle-class families. So I do support fairness in the tax code. I think the effective tax rate needs to be flatter across all income brackets.
Thank you. Ms. Hillstrom?
Well, let's not pretend that the 2011 legislature didn't raise taxes. It's which taxes did they raise? And they raised your property taxes. And so one of the things that people like to pretend is that taxes are not being raised by one group or the other. But let's face it, when you eliminate the market value homestead credit, our citizens paid more taxes. When they cut local government aid, our citizens are paying more taxes. They're paying it on their property taxes. So we have a choice to make. We can either have the state collect the taxes based on income, which is the most fair way to pay taxes, or we can pay more on the least fair tax, which is our property taxes, and that's because it's not based on your ability to pay. Senior citizens who are on fixed incomes, who don't have a job maybe anymore, can't impact whether or not their property taxes go up. Right? They can't decide they're not going to buy it. With a sales tax, you can make a decision you're not going to go and buy something. With your income tax, you can change your budgeting if you know that your income's going to change. Property taxes are the least fair.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson?
Thank you. And first, let me say I support a progressive tax system that is based on one's ability to pay. But I've said this before, and I'll continue to say it. I think we got the cart before the horse when we talk about taxes. As I said in the previous question, we need to have an honest discussion with our citizens about what we want our government to provide for us, what services, what things we need to get done. And when we decide what that is, and we should have strong arguments back and forth between one another about what those services are, but when we decide that these are the services we want our government to provide, good schools, good roads, you can go down the list, we need to come up with a fair system to pay for them. And lately, we've not been doing that. And when we come up with that system, then we need to be willing to pay for it.
Thank you. Our next question. Do you support increasing, no, we did that one. Do you support a single-payer health care system for Minnesota? Why or why not? What effect do you think a single-payer system will have on Minnesotans? Our first responder is Mr. Cushing.
Well, as was pointed out earlier this evening, if 6 million people across the are going to be penalized under the Affordable Care Act, and the fact that we're adding more insured into a program that is almost going to assure that there will be fewer doctors, and it requires 4,000 more IRS agents, I'm not sure it can be called a CARE Act at all. It's clearly what the Supreme Court said it was. It's a tax. So the answers to health care are not going to be found in a bigger or more pervasive government or more unfunded mandates. In Minnesota, we have a huge number of mandates put on insurance companies. Right now, there are more than 35 mandates that could be easily eliminated, and we could allow Minnesotans to buy any policy sold in the U.S. This would make health care much more affordable.
Thank you. Ms. Hillstrom.
Well, Minnesota already has universal health care. It's just the wrong kind. It's show up at the hospital and you'll get treated in an emergency situation and we'll all pay for it. So one of the things that we need to do in Minnesota is we need to make sure that we have folks that are insured. because then they'll go to the doctor instead of showing up at the hospital, and it'll be cheaper. So one of the things that we've been doing is moving towards having more people be insured and making it more affordable. So some of the mandates, I disagree, are very important. It used to be that a woman's ability to go to a gynecologist was not mandated to be covered. Certain basic health care needs to be covered, and we need to make certain that our insurance companies are not going for profit rather than going for the health care of our residents in the future.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson.
I have supported in the past the concept of a single-payer system and believe someday we as a nation will get there. But the question is, how are we going to get there? The Affordable Health Care Act moves us somewhat in that direction, but it is still a system based on private insurance companies. We need to get a handle on the cost drivers of our health insurance system, like Representative Hillstrom said about showing up at the hospital and getting treated for stuff that should be taken care of in the doctor's office much cheaper. And we need to stop fooling ourselves. We're all paying for that. Those of us that have insurance are paying more money in our insurance because people that don't have insurance are getting treated, and the doctors and the hospitals are shifting the cost to us. So we need to work out, get a system where everyone's covered so that they can get the basic stuff done that they need to get done and not end up in the hospital where we end up paying more money for it.
Thank you. Mr. Reinhardt?
Yeah, no, I believe that we need to keep government out of healthcare as much as possible. We need to expand the free market. It all comes down to personal choice. It comes down to consumer choice. Consumers drive so much in our economy, and they make the best decisions, whether it's expanding health accounts where people can actually decide what quality they want for what price. Today's system is not really free market because you have a lot of insurance companies who are billing as middlemen, and the people aren't actually making those decisions. They aren't actually seeing how much stuff costs. But then again, if they go and pay cash, they see that it's a fraction of the price. So again, it's getting consumers in charge. And you know, we've seen some medical industries like LASIK that have been a prime example of when it goes free market, how the quality stays up, how the price comes down, how free market really drives. And I think we need to just keep moving in that direction as much as we can with healthcare. And again, keep government out as much as possible.
Thank you. And Ms. Hortman?
Yeah, the question was, do we support a single-payer system in the state of Minnesota? And my answer to that question is no. I don't think that one state can do it on its own. I think that that would make that state an island. I think health care is a national issue. We have a national economy, and businesses are free to move from one state to another. So I think the correct approach was the one that the federal government did take in looking at across the 50 states, what's the reform that makes the most sense. And President Obama and the Congress looked to Massachusetts and a plan that was crafted by the Heritage Foundation with strong input from the private insurers in the private market. And what they did is they looked at how Romney Care was working in Massachusetts, and what it did is it strengthened the private market by covering more people. As Representative Hillstrom pointed out, you actually lower the cost of health care so that people are getting care at the point where it's the most efficient for them to be getting care, and not in the emergency room where we would all pay for it anyway.
Thank you. Our next one-minute question is, the achievement gap is a statewide concern. What strategies would you recommend to address this issue, starting with early childhood education? Our first responder is Ms. Hortman.
The achievement gap is caused by a lot of different factors, and so in order to solve the achievement gap, we would need to look at all the different causes. Some of the causes are the huge income disparities that we have in this country. You look at G20 countries around the world, and they don't have the kind of achievement gap that we do here, and in part that's because they don't have the kind of income inequality that we do here. So quite simply, you can't solve the achievement gap without doing something about the rate of poverty in the United States. There's also about 25% of the achievement gap is caused by health factors. Children in lower income areas with asthma, lead pollution, low iron, those things impact IQ and they impact attendance. So you have to look at the public health pieces. There's also a huge mobility issue impacting the achievement gap. But one of the most critical things we can do is strengthen early childhood education and all-day, everyday kindergarten. Minnesota should be a leader in this area.
Thank you. Mr. Reinhardt?
Well, one thing I want to do is continue to try to equalize the funding, where Minneapolis-St. Paul schools are getting thousands more per pupil than suburban schools. I think that's important. Also, as a big volunteer at Edinburgh school here, I've seen that, I'm a little skeptical of the early childhood boost, because I see that, and especially there's a lot of data that shows that students up till about 8th grade are competing with other kids from other countries, but then it starts to really drop off in the high school levels. I don't know how much that early boost gives them. I know it's a lot of people, the unions are a big favorite because you can have more teachers. Some parents are in favor of it because you can get maybe back in the workforce sooner, but I'm just a little bit skeptical of if you don't put that money into later, into higher education or into high schools. One big thing that we can do is teacher performance. I want teacher performance to be a portion of the evaluation along with seniority, something my opponent went against. And then also I want more choice in education, expanding charter schools, letting parents vote with their dollars and their feet.
Thank you. Ms. Hillstrom.
Well, even economists like Art Rolnick say that investment in early childhood education is the smartest money. We can make certain that our kids are ready to learn, or we can pay more later on in their education. So early investment in education is the smart money. When kids are worried about where their next meal is going to come from as they're sitting in class, they're not focusing on what the teacher's saying. When they're worried about where they're going to live next, they're not focusing on what the teacher's saying. Our schools in this area have been doing a really great job in trying to address some of those issues. For example, the Brooklyn Center School District now has a health care facility right in the building. Anoka-Hennepin School District instituted backpacks for kids that don't have food on the weekends. They're actually sending them home with food in their bags for the weekends. They're going a long way to address some of the other social issues that interfere with the ability for kids to learn. That really goes a long way to start bridging that gap, the achievement gap, and taking care of the kids' ability to focus and really learn what the teachers are already teaching.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson?
Thank you. And to continue on that, we need to shift away from the emphasis on teaching and on testing our kids and teaching to the test, and get back to educating all the kids. We need to give our teachers and our schools the tools they need to bring with it, and to bring them back into the discussion of how to improve our education system and stop playing politics. We also need to stop blaming the teachers for everything that is wrong. This is not fixing the problems. We also need to continue to work with the federal government to get them to fund their commitment to special education and so take the stress away from our local school budgets. And we also need to talk to the parents. They need to step up also and need to make sure their kids are ready for school and are school on time and are ready to learn when they get there.
Thank you. And Mr. Cushing?
Well, if this was a classroom, I'd like to ask how many here think that if the Vikings would be a winning team if they had to staff their team the same way schools are forced to staff their teachers on a last-in, first-out basis. I'm guessing we would see a lot fewer winning games from the Vikings. So I think the schools ought to be allowed to hire, reward, and retain the very best teachers, and we should end LIFO staffing, which is something that my opponent voted for and the governor vetoed. Let's let parents choose the very best schools for their students, whether that school's public, private, or charter school, and let the tax money follow the student to school. Let's hold students and schools accountable. And how about offering dollar-for-dollar tax credits to businesses who fund scholarships for economically disadvantaged schools or students so that they can attend private schools if they're going to get a better education there?
Thank you. We're now moving on to the 30-second questions from the audience. First one is, please talk about how important renewable energy is to you and how jobs can be created in this market. Our first responder will be Ms. Hillstrom.
Well, renewable energy is very important to Minnesota's future. If we want to be less reliant on foreign oil, we need to make certain that we have the way to deal with our own energy needs. And renewable energies is one of them. Even companies like XL Energy, who is the employer of my husband, is working hard to have a healthy balance of renewable energy with other energy sources to make certain that we have, when we turn on the lights come on, right? When we need fuel for our cars, we have it. $4 a gallon is too high, and we need to find other sources for energy.
Thank you. Mr. Cushing.
Well, I think we could go a long way to achieving a better energy balance if we would remove many of the mandates that are presently on how we produce energy and how it's consumed in this state. The free market has demonstrated itself at being able to regulate and reduce the cost of many things, including all the iPhones that are in your pockets today, if we just give the free market a chance.
Thank you. Mr. Reinhardt?
Well, there's a big danger when you go all in on the latest fad, especially when government's footing the bill. And we've seen it, whether you've seen it with the ethanol disaster, whether you've seen it with Solyndra, all these other companies that are far too expensive. One big thing we need to do, like Mr. Cushing just said, I think he alluded to, he didn't say it specifically, but is to remove the mandate on producing or at least exploring new nuclear facilities. It's the best way to go, cheapest way to go, and cleanest way to go.
Ms. Hortman?
Yeah, I think for decades to come, we will rely in the state for our baseload power on coal and natural gas. But I do think it's intelligent to diversify our portfolio and get as much wind energy as we can. Minnesota is very rich in wind energy, and we are a nationwide leader. It's also very efficient. Minnesota is also very solar rich. We have more solar potential here than in Germany, which is the global leader right now. And if individuals can generate their own energy, they have more power in the market. So distributed generation through solar gives consumers more power in the market.
Thank you. And Mr. Nelson?
I support renewable energy. I think it can be the backbone of a stronger economy for the state of Minnesota, more jobs, new jobs that aren't out there currently, wind, solar, and I support ethanol because these are ways for us to reduce our need on foreign oil, and then that's something we have to do.
Thank you. Our next question, would you support a right-to-work law in Minnesota? Our first responder is Mr. Nelson.
No.
I suppose we should put why or why not. Would you like to expand on that one?
If you want me to expand, no, I don't support that. Right to work is a misnomer. It's right to work for less. You take away your ability to bargain with your employer, and what drives wages down, and that doesn't help our economy. When a third of our economy is consumer spending, and we take money out of our consumers' pockets, that hurts our economy as a state.
Thank you. Ms. Hillstrom?
No, I don't support the right-to-work legislation. My family has a long history of having union in their background. My grandfather was one of the first Teamsters who actually participated in the riot. They brought you the weekend. They brought you the 40-hour work week. And if you want to go back to not having weekends, to not having access to health care through your employer and those kinds of things, bring right-to-work to Minnesota. I think it's the wrong thing.
Mr. Cushing?
Well, I think it's a reach to say we're going to go back anywhere, but no, I don't support, I do support a right to work in this state, because what needs to be understood is that unions may make gains, but they do so at the expense of the rest of the economy. If I'm paying more for labor over here, it means some part of the economy is getting less. It might be less at the grocery store, less at the coffee shop, less at the gas station. But
thank you. It's only 30 seconds. All right, Mr. Reinhardt.
Yes, I support it. And again, my father was a lifelong union factory worker until he passed away the night before caucus this year. But I do also make a big distinction between public and private sector unions, especially because in a lot of cases with the unions funding so much of one side, you have basically the unions negotiating with themselves. If my father's factory, if they played hardball, the union played hardball, they could determine if they're going to raise the price of tires or they're going to cut the CEO's compensation or move the plant. When it comes to the public sector, it's coming right out of citizens' pockets. And I just think there's a big distinction between the two sides.
Thank you. Ms. Hortman.
I think you have to look at the data. In the states that have adopted right-to-work legislation, wages have gone down and standard of living has gone down. So I oppose it for that reason. I think President Clinton said it best the other night when he said when GM pays its employees enough to actually purchase the cars that they're producing, everybody's better off, the workers and GM.
Thank you. Our next question. How important do you view early childhood education as a component in improving education outcome, and what might you propose to better prepare our young children for kindergarten? So a little more specific than what we talked about before. Our first responder will be Ms. Hortman.
Is it okay if I ask you to repeat the question?
Absolutely. It kind of expands on a little bit on our gap one before, but how important do you view early childhood education as a component in improving education outcome, and what might you propose to better prepare our young children for kindergarten?
I think early childhood education is critically important. You know, some of us in middle-class families have the opportunity to read to our children at night and provide them with books and the things that they need to stimulate their mind. Other families that have both parents working a number of jobs to make ends meet have a harder time providing their children with the exposure to all those words that they need to learn by kindergarten. Early childhood education can level the playing field for those kids so that every kid can go to kindergarten prepared. This state is behind the national average, and we need to catch up.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson.
I guess I have to agree with a lot of what Melissa just said. Early childhood is important to keeping our kids ready to go to kindergarten, so that they can get that leg up through the rest of their grade school. And I guess, like I said, we need to support it and help get rid of the achievement gap.
Thank you. Ms. Hillstrom?
Well, early childhood education is not available to everyone. We have great ECFE programs here. We have great access to early childhood education here. And we even have all-day kindergarten in many of our schools. Most folks don't have access to that across the state. And one of the things that we actually hear from employers is that our kids are not ready to work. So we first need to get them ready to learn, then we need to get them educated, and then we need to have them prepared to go into the workforce and be productive members of society.
Thank you. Mr. Cushing?
Well, I think children are natural-born learners. That's kind of how God made them. But I'd like to take a different tack on this, because the fact that somebody has to work or that both parents have to work 2 or 3 jobs is a manifestation of too much spending and too much taxation by government. They don't have time to do it, and it's government's problem.
Thank you. Mr. Reinhardt?
Yeah, the way the question was phrased of what's the best way to prepare the kids, and again, I put the best way to prepare in the hands of parents and rather than in the hands of government. I was shocked. I have a 9- and 7-year-old how fast the school district was in the room as the babies were sitting there already trying to get us into early childhood. I think there can be some benefit to it, but I just wonder how much is dissipated over the course of the years, and I just wonder when we really have to have our kids in high school and college competing with kids from China and Russia and India, how much is better spent in those later years.
Next question. What is your position on the issue of defined benefits and defined contributions for public employee pensions? Our first responder will be Mr. Reinhardt.
Yeah, well, we're clearly in trouble as a state and as a nation. We've had a lot of states have had trouble, and you see it in California. So I think we need to, obviously examine the contracts going forward and even examine the promises that were made and see if they're realistic. Is it realistic, or are you going to have your state continue to suffer and in some cases in some cities and areas go bankrupt? So it definitely need to reevaluate everything. I guess it's, and obviously it's a case-by-case basis based on which particular union you're talking about or issue.
Thank you. Ms. Hartman?
The Minnesota pension system is actually very well funded. You look across the country and there are examples of states and cities who don't have adequate funding in their public pension systems. Minnesota is not one of those. We have been very conservative. I like to think of it as the Pa Ingalls approach, buy nothing on credit. And so our pensions are very well funded. And I think promises made should be promises kept. The way that people's pensions are calculated is a part of the agreement for their compensation. You don't change that after the fact. You definitely look at it going forward and what makes economic sense, but you don't change it after the fact.
Mr. Nelson.
Well, having served on the Pension Commission, and 6 years ago and 4 years ago, we made some changes to it to deal with some of the problems we had. The last few years, our pensions have been increasing in their funded levels. Prior to the 2008 crash of the economy, most of our pensions were 100% funded. The other thing I'm going to say that before the stop sign is there's studies out there that show that for a government entity like we have, that it's 40% cheaper to have a defined benefit pension than a defined contribution plan. So it's cheaper for us to have a pension like a defined benefit pension to provide the same level of benefits to our retired employees. And again, those were negotiated, those were part of their wages going forward. They were taking out their wages. So.
Thank you. Ms. Hillstrom.
Well, defined benefit is cheaper, and I think that it's only respectful that we make certain that our workers who have worked their entire life have the ability to take care of themselves in their later years. We can either make certain they have a pension that they can live on, or we're going to end up funding them later, right? Then we'll be paying for their nursing home care, we'll be paying, it'll be more expensive. So I think we need to make certain that people have a pension plan that permits them to live their own life and not be dependent on the government later.
Thank you. And Mr. Cushing.
I think it's a reach to say that Minnesota doesn't have a problem with unfunded liabilities over public sector pensions. We definitely need to address it. I think we should honor the commitments to those that have them, but we need to look at changes going forward.
Thank you. Our next question. Given the current state of partisan discord in the legislature, in what areas do you think you can find agreement? Our first responder will be Mr. Cushing.
Well, I think we can find considerable agreement over the ways to deal with fiscal issues, which is most of the problems. We need to look at what really works, what is proven to work historically, both in other states and across the nation, and begin to buckle down and make the hard decisions that need to be made.
Thank you. Mr. Reinhardt?
Could you repeat again?
Yes. Sorry. That's okay. Given the current state of partisan discord in the legislature, in what areas do you think you can find agreement?
Well, one thing I definitely think I can work more in the suburban ring. In the past, there has always been a natural balance between urban power, strong DFL, and then suburbs having a strong Republican. And in past years, when some of those areas have gone to the other side, I think some of the representatives don't have the numbers or the power to actually keep the suburbs strong, to keep some of the dollars here, and to fight for our values and what we need up here. And so, in essence, the suburbs become an ATM to fund inner-city projects. And I believe I can best fight for this district, knowing this district, and fight for the suburbs.
Thank you. Ms. Hartman.
One area that I'm already working on and have been over the summer break is math and science education. I have a very unlikely ally in Mitch Perlstein at the Center for the American Experiment. He and I both share a concern about math and science education in the state of Minnesota, and I've been working with Chair Garofalo, the Republican chair of the K-12 Finance Committee, on ways that we can work together to improve math and science education for all of Minnesota's students.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson?
Thank you. And in the past years when I've been in the legislature, I've worked across the aisle with many Republican representatives, some that I disagree with on a lot of issues, but find things that we can work on together. And I've done that, and I will continue to do that when I go back to this fall.
Thank you. Ms. Hellstrom?
Well, there has been tremendous gridlock, right, at the legislature. This was the longest government shutdown in state history took place this time. And I want you to know one of the things that you need to do is you need to separate out issues. When you mix social issues in with your budgeting negotiations, it makes for a disaster. That's what happened. So I have consistently worked bipartisan, especially in the area of public safety, which is the area I chaired when I was in the majority party. My public safety bill passed unanimously off the House floor. That clearly shows I have the ability to work together.
Thank you. Our next question. What will you do to help bring businesses into Brooklyn Park or Brooklyn Center? Our first responder will be Mr. Nelson.
It's difficult, I would say, for us at the state level to do projects or for specific areas. One of the things they tell us when we go in there, your state representative is not a Brooklyn Park representative. Although we can do that by helping reduce, which I've done in the past, red tape for businesses, One thing that I got in some trouble with my own caucus this last year, working on trying to reduce some of the regulations that are there that businesses have. We can do that at the state level. We can help move businesses into the state of Minnesota.
Thank you. Ms. Hortman?
Yeah, I think one area that would be really exciting is for us to build on the success of the Target expansion in Brooklyn Park. That's 3,900 technology jobs. It's a golden opportunity for us to become a technology business magnet. Working with the presidents of our community colleges and our technical college and the high schools, both in the Osseo School District and the Anoka-Hennepin School District, if we take this opportunity to really focus so that the families of those technology employees want to have their families live in Brooklyn Park and have their children grow up in our schools and have the opportunities at our community colleges, I think that technology is a real big opportunity for us right now.
Thank you. Could someone please turn off the volume of their cell phone, please? Thank you. Mr. Reinhardt.
Yes, I mean, after years and years of decline, I don't think anyone would deny that in Brooklyn Park. We've seen incredible growth the last couple of years. Again, having a Republican senator helps, having a Republican-endorsed mayor helps. A lot of it is local control. It's having the lower taxes. It's cutting down regulations at the local level, but it's also stuff that can be done at the legislature, doing the same thing, making the state more business-friendly, making the suburbs more business-friendly, cutting taxes where possible, and continuing prosperity.
Mr. Cushing.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Nelson. The things that entice businesses to start and grow is reducing regulation, reducing the tax burden, and interestingly, while the Democrats tend to notice that when they're inviting businesses, they forget that it actually works all the time.
Thank you. Ms. Hillstrom?
Well, one of the things that we need to do is make sure that our local units of government have the tools that they need to attract businesses. For example, in Brooklyn Center, we've had some polluted land, right? The state was a partner with Brooklyn Center in order to work to clean that land up to make it so that a business could come in. And you're seeing now that polluted land, for example, Starbucks the world headquarters for Caribou Coffee now is located in Brooklyn Center in an area that used to be polluted land. So we need to make certain that local units of government have the tools they need in order to allow businesses to succeed here.
Thank you. Our next question. Do you believe in parental choice in education? Why or why not? What choice options do you support? Our first responder is Ms. Hillstrom.
Well, that's kind of a loaded question, and you could pretty much go anywhere. I believe that parents should have the right to choose charter schools. I was a big supporter of charter schools. I do not believe that public money should be going to fund private schools. I believe we need to make our public schools strong, that our residents want to send their children there. And the way you do it isn't by taking $2.4 billion from them. You need to make certain that you have quality public schools and then allow parents to have choices within those public schools.
Thank you. Mr. Cushing?
Well, I think you can tell by my earlier statement that I'm a big advocate for school choice. I think there's lots of ways, and actually Florida, beginning in 1999, has instituted a very successful program of finding even alternate ways to fund and create charter schools. It's been very successful at closing the gap between minorities and whites.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson?
I've supported school choice in the past in charter schools, but like Representative Hillstrom, I don't think we should be giving state money to private schools and sucking the public schools dry. They have the ability to pick and choose their students. Where the public schools have to take everyone that comes there, and unless the private schools have to take everyone that comes there with all the problems that some of them kids have, then I don't support giving private schools the money from the public schools.
Thank you. Ms. Hortman?
I think we're really lucky in Minnesota that we have a very strong system of public school choice. We were the nation's pioneers, and we were the first state in the country to have public charter schools so parents could choose niche schools for their child if they wanted to. But charter schools aren't the whole answer. What we need is choice within the schools that kids are going to. We need to make sure that kids have the opportunity to choose AP and IB, college in the schools, and post-secondary enrollment options. Those are in danger of being cut at some of our schools because of tight budgets.
Thank you. And Mr. Reinhardt?
Yes, I favor complete free market choice. Money should go to the parents. The parents should decide. Plain and simple. Kids shouldn't be forced to go to a school that's failing them and failing the parents. It's not right. It's not American. And we see it in our own community here. Like I said, I've been involved at Edinbrook Elementary for years as a volunteer. You see a lot of the kids taking their students, or a lot of the parents taking their kids over to Parnassus, a place that's getting a fraction of the funding, that doesn't have carpet, but they're teaching the kids. They're teaching the kids discipline. And the parents are making that decision. That's where they want their kids to go to school, and you're seeing a lot of success.
Thank you. Our next question. The current Minnesota House of Representatives has been cutting money to higher education. What steps will you take to adequately fund higher education? Our first responder will be Mr. Nelson.
This has been a part of the reason we've been doing budget cuts for the last 10 years, and that I've been in the legislature, because we're short of revenue. And this kind of ties into the last question, because years back, they made a decision that instead of supporting the colleges, the state colleges, we're going to support the students, and the money's been going to the private schools, and so there's less money going to our state institutions. And so, again, it's a backwards way of doing it.
Thank you. Mr. Cushing?
I'm going to ask you to repeat the question.
Absolutely. The current Minnesota House of Representatives has been cutting money to higher education. What steps will you take to adequately fund higher education?
Well, I guess the simple answer to that is that I believe for the most part higher education is already adequately funded. The fact of the matter is, if you look nationwide, when higher education gets more money, they don't hire more or better teachers, they hire more administrators. That has been proven time and again. What we need to do is make them do what's right, and that's hire instructors and hire the academic staff, not administration.
Thank you. Ms. Hortman?
Yeah, ever since the horrible deficits that we started to encounter in 2003, we've been cutting Minnesota's budget, and one of the areas we've cut the most is higher education. So we've gone from being a reasonable tuition state to a very high tuition state. I've had constituents when I'm out door knocking saying they're moving to North Carolina or Virginia because that's where they can afford to get a nursing degree or a computer science degree. So we have to keep in mind that a balanced approach to solving our budget deficit will help us be able to keep tuition affordable and keep people in the state.
Ms. Hillstrom?
We know that businesses want to go where the educated workforce is. And so our higher education institutions need to be training our students, and we need to make it so that it's affordable. Every student who wants to go to college needs to have access to the financial ability to go if they have the academic ability. For example, we have a shortage of engineers. Businesses are telling us over and over again, we need to have more engineers. It's very expensive to go to school to be an engineer, and it's very hard to get into our programming. And so we need to make certain there's a balance and we can get our kids the education they need.
Thank you. And Mr. Reinhardt?
Yeah, when I went to college a few years back as an adult, because I used the GI Bill from my military service, I was amazed at the list of majors and some of the majors that some students were taking. And again, if you're going to take some of those majors, it maybe should be more on your own dime and on the public dime. But, you know, U of M, nice new stadium. They've got, I think, 12, 13. I'll have to look up the numbers again. Administrators making over $100,000 a year. And a lot of it does come down at every level of education to looking at people examining how much money is into the system, how much money goes to the instructor, and where is the rest of the money going? Every level.
Thank you. Our next question. What is your position on the voter ID amendment? First responder is Mr. Reinhardt.
Strongly in support of it. I think it makes sense. IDs can be provided to those who don't currently have them. I'm also very glad it went before the voters. I would like to see more things go before the voters, like stadiums. So strongly in support of it. Makes sense. You need to have an ID to do almost anything in the society. You should have an ID to vote. There's a little bit of cost associated with it, but it's definitely a cost worth paying. It's a cost that I fought for in the military to preserve our rights as Americans to vote.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson?
I do not support the voter suppression amendment that's going to be on the ballot. A perfect example of how it's going to impact people is we had to provide evidence of last year of of our dependents so we could have health insurance. And one of our legislators who was born in one state, she was married in another state, divorced in another state, her 3 kids were born in different states, to get all that data to prove that those were her dependents, she couldn't get it done in the time required. We're going to have that same problem with people being able to get IDs.
Thank you. Mr. Cushing.
I'm a big supporter of making voting easy and cheating hard. So I support the voter ID amendment because right now we have a system that makes voting easy and cheating easy. So not to mention the fact that this amendment has overwhelming support all across the state, both in the metro area and outside in the outlying areas. It's a good amendment.
Ms. Hortman?
I think it's a very expensive solution to a problem that doesn't exist. There is not a problem of voter impersonation, somebody going to the polls and pretending to be somebody that they're not. The only voter fraud, if you can call it that, that's happened in Minnesota is felons not realizing that their civil rights haven't been restored and that they shouldn't be voting. And having a driver's license and presenting that wouldn't have prevented those situations. So it's a very, very expensive system, and the harm that it will create by requiring provisional ballots and having people's provisional ballots then not counted creates a bigger problem than it would even potentially solve.
Ms. Hillstrom?
Well, I don't support the amendment, and I was asking questions during the legislative session. My son doesn't go to school in Minnesota. He goes to college in Iowa. So my question was, when does he show his ID to get his ballot? And the answer was, that's not who we're talking about. I have a friend who's serving in the military overseas. I said, when does he show his ID to get his ballot? And they said, that's not who we're talking about. Then I said, okay, I have senior citizens who live in a nursing home. When do they show, if they can't get out and go to the poll, when do they show their ID to get their ballot? And the answer was, that's not who we're talking about. Okay, who are we talking about? And when do people show their ID if they can't be at the polls on Election Day? Vote no.
Thank you. Our next question. In the state of Minnesota, what would you consider a livable wage for a family of 4? Our first responder will be Mr. Cushing.
Well, I guess a livable wage for the family of 4 would depend on how high the taxes are. The higher the taxes are, the higher your wages have to be. So if we can work on reducing the tax burden on every taxpayer, then we can worry about what the livable wage would be.
Thank you. Mr. Reinhardt?
Well, yeah, again, it would depend, I guess, on where you live and how much you're paying. I think, the important thing is, we want to go into this quick thing of saying who the rich are, and we just said top 10% is $130,000, which, again, depending on where you live, depending on what your mortgage is, is not necessarily rich. But I mean, I struggle as, I'm a middle-class family that struggles. I've struggled all my life, been blue-collar, and I think you make do with the best you can. You work hard, you work as many jobs as can be, take care of your family.
Ms. Hillstrom.
Well, I disagree that the top 10% is not $130,000. I think that fact is wrong. I think that people who work a full-time job should be able to afford a place to live. And right now, folks who work full-time jobs are living in their cars and living under bridges, and I don't think that that is right. Currently, minimum wage is $7.25 in some businesses, and on average, if you look at some of the living wage calculators, they predict that if you're just alone, a single adult, about $8 an hour.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson?
Again, yeah, that's the minimum wage at $7.25 is a $14,000 a year salary, and that's not enough to live on and get a rent and pay rent in when rents are $1,000 a month in most places, and mortgages are above $1,000 a month. That's not enough to live on for a single person. I don't know what the level would be, but it should be more higher than what it is.
And Ms. Hortman?
Yeah, the minimum wage is too low. It really hasn't kept pace with inflation over the years. I have introduced legislation to increase the minimum wage in Minnesota, and we have worked on this in the years that I've been there. I can't say what the exact amount of a living wage for a family of 4, but I do know that the federal minimum wage and the Minnesota minimum wage of $7.25 an hour is not sufficient to keep families out of poverty in the state of Minnesota, and I do think we should increase the minimum wage.
Thank you. Our last 30-second question is, how have you or how will you reach out to the diverse communities within your district and throughout the state? First responder is Ms. Hillstrom.
One of the things that we consistently do is go out to events that the different communities are having. For example, I think last year we were out at a soccer tournament. I think we've been out at some of the festivals. One of the things that's really important is to go out into the community where the residents are and talk to them about things that are important to them as well. And also inviting them to participate. We have town meetings. We ask them to attend. We've been working really hard.
Thank you. Ms. Hortman?
We have a very large population of librarians in the city of Brooklyn Park, and I've worked to develop relationships with members of that community through the Organization for Librarians in Minnesota. And there's also a very strong population of Laotians in the city of Brooklyn Park, and a significant number of them served with our military in Vietnam, and have worked with them on trying to get some fairness in veterans' benefits and burial rights.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson?
As Representative Hillstrom said, we've gone to community events. We've reached out to leaders in their communities. We've had our town meetings. We've invited them to those. But it's a constant battle of having to go and talk to these people and getting them all to get involved in our communities, because they're there and they should be part of it also. But that's what we've done.
Thank you. Mr. Reinhardt?
Yeah, I've served the community in several different things. I've been out with the Brooklyn Park Lions. I was the first president of the board of the Brooklyn Park Lions Drum and Bugle Corps, where we took some of the kids from the worst areas and raised them up. Had some really inspiring stories of taking some kids, getting their grades, getting them disciplined, showing what it's like to be part of a team, be part of something, to be a part of the community. I've served overseas. I've served in two different branches. I've served with all different kinds of people. I'm not scared. I go out in the community. I engage everyone. I learn the stories. I learn what their issues are, and I try to solve their problems the best I can.
Thank you. And Mr. Cushing?
Well, I've personally been around to, in my district, I think probably the majority of the minority-owned businesses, and shaken hands with the business owners, introduced myself. In addition to working with a large group of minority leaders, 30 or 40 minority leaders that are involved with building this relationship through the Republican Party. If you check my Facebook page, you'll find pictures where I've been meeting with these folks.
Thank you. And now we'll go to our closing question, in which we'll go in the reverse order from which we began this evening. In summary, how do you intend to best serve your district and move the state forward? Our first responder will be Ms. Deborah Hillstrom.
Again, it has been an honor to represent you in the legislature, and I ask for your support to send me back to the Capitol to work together to make certain that at a time when we're balancing a budget, that our community doesn't bear more than its fair share of the burden and the cost. I think that at a time of balancing the budget, you need to have people who can work together to solve problems and make certain that you don't sacrifice our values of education, growing jobs and the economy, public safety. You need to not sacrifice those things in order to stand by an ideology. I have always worked hard, and I ask for your vote to continue to fight for Brooklyn Center and Brooklyn Park. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Richard Cushing?
Well, I think there's some very specific things that I can do to help and serve this district. First of all, I would like to help reduce the cost of health insurance for all Minnesotans. Of course, the ones in my district would benefit from that by allowing them to buy any health care policy sold anywhere in the U.S. so that they get the coverage they want at a price that's more competitive. I'd like to reduce the cost of energy to both individuals and businesses by eliminating the artificial controls on how energy is produced and consumed in the state. I'd like to improve the K-12 education by instituting the reforms that have proven effective at reducing the education gap in the state of Florida, and I'd like to encourage job creation and slash unemployment by reducing taxes and the barriers to starting and running your own small business.
Thank you. Mr. Andrew Reinhardt.
Well, thank you for being here. I've been out there. I've served the community. I've been in the trenches. I know what this community wants. I know what this community needs. I can work with surrounding legislators from our prosperous suburbs to help us, to help the whole area. Again, it's about having a better economy. It's about growing jobs, less regulations. But I'll also stand up to my party if it's not following my value system. That's something that I'll be really tough about. I lost my father the night before caucus night this year, and he was a guy who was tough as nails, who didn't like politicians really on either side, but he really supported me from his heart because he knew I was coming from the right place. He liked the fact that I was recruited to run. He liked that an average guy from the community got a boost up based on what he was doing in the community, and that I could go out there and I could do good for our people, do good for citizens here. I really believe it in my heart. I know the issues. I know the problems. I'm ready to go and solve them. I'm ready to work together and get the job done. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Melissa Hortman.
Thank you. Thanks for having us here tonight. The three things that I would do moving forward are the three things that I've done since I got elected in 2004. I believe in hard work, I believe in collaboration, and I believe in communication. And if you're willing to work hard and you're willing to work with other people you don't agree with sometimes, and you're willing to really listen to the residents of our community, to your colleagues at the state capitol, you can really get a lot done. Bipartisanship works. When the 35W bridge collapsed, Democrats and Republicans worked together. We put aside $2.5 billion to fix every bridge in the state by 2018. And the only way that worked was people not throwing rocks at each other across the aisle, but people rolling up their sleeves and working together and actually really listening. We can take that same bipartisanship to the achievement gap, and we could make a real difference here in Minnesota. I've chosen to run for office not to fight with people on the other side of the aisle, but to work with them to solve problems. I ask for your vote on November 6th.
Thank you. And Mr. Michael Nelson.
Thank you again for having us here. And good jobs that pay livable wages have always been the key to the strong Minnesota economy. We need to continue to do what we can to get our citizens back to work. Most of our budget problems the last few years have been caused not by overspending, but by drops in income tax and sales tax revenue. We need to continue to invest in our roads, infrastructure by paying for our roads and bridges, but we also need to invest in our residents through education so they can get good-paying jobs. If reelected, I will continue to work with Brooklyn Park residents and my colleagues in the House to deliver the type of Minnesota we've come to expect and deserve. And I want to thank you for your vote on November 6th.
Thank you. Once again, on behalf of the League of Women Voters and the North Hennepin Area Chamber of Commerce, I would like to thank the candidates for agreeing to participate in tonight's forum. It's been our pleasure to host you. I would also like to thank the voters for attending and participating by submitting excellent questions, and I would like to thank the TV viewing audience as well. Remember that if we could not get to your question tonight, or if you have any further questions for the candidates, we invite you to contact them directly with your concerns. Please remember to get out there and vote on Tuesday, November 6th, as your vote truly counts. Thank you all and have a good evening.